Good morning. My name is Mishal Hussain, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the World Food Prize Foundation. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 17th Annual Iowa Hunger Summit. For the first time, this gathering is being held both in person and live-streamed so that audiences across Iowa can be a part of today's dialogue. And for the first time, the Iowa Hunger Summit is taking place in our Norman Borlaug Hall of Laureates. In this historic building, Iowa's great agricultural and humanitarian leaders are highlighted. Among them, hunger heroes such as Herbert Hoover, Henry A. Wallace, and George Washington Carver, and our founder, Dr. Norman Borlaug. Their legacies provide the inspiration for the work of the Iowa Hunger Summit. Today's gathering brings together voices from every corner of Iowa and represent a diverse tapestry of community organizations, businesses, government entities, and passionate individuals with a commitment to eradicating hunger. From its very beginning, the Iowa Hunger Summit has been an event where partisan differences were checked at the door, and everyone was united in a common, shared endeavor. This event began in October 2006 as an idea featured in the editorial edition of the Des Moines Register and co-authored by three former Iowa governors, Robert D. Ray, Tom Vilsack, and Terry Branstad. 1 year later, at the first Iowa Hunger Summit, the iconic photo was taken of Dr. Borlaug surrounded by those three former governors and newly elected Governor Chet Culver. Dr. Borlaug had a smile on his face as he proudly held the proclamation establishing this historic event. Now it's my great privilege and honor to introduce one of the original founders of this gathering, the former governor of Iowa and now president of the World Food Prize Foundation, Ambassador Terry Branstad.
Thank you, Mishal Hussain. It's been a real inspiration to work with you for the last 7 months. I want to thank you for the great work you do here, and I want to welcome all of you to the 2023 Iowa Hunger Summit. I am so proud to have been part of this journey since it started 17 years ago. Back then, we had a shared commitment to collaborate on hunger solutions that would touch the lives of people all across our great state. Today, I can tell you that the urgency of that mission is still with us. This year, we confront even greater challenges as we pursue the goal of zero hunger and substantially reducing diet-related diseases. This summit, first of all, every Iowan should have access to nutritious food, and no Iowan should ever go hungry. This summit is designed to bring organizations and individuals from across our 99 counties together to address these challenges. Today, we will focus on the theme, Paths to Zero, which encourages us to search for new, diverse solutions and form even stronger partnerships. We are here to spur actions across all sectors, introduce what's new, and reinforce programs that are already working. Before we begin, I see so many familiar faces, and friends in this audience. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I want to personally express our great appreciation to the Iowa Grocery Industry Association and Hy-Vee for sponsoring today's gathering. I'd like to acknowledge elected officials and government leaders who will be part of the program today. They include Governor Kim Reynolds, Secretary of Agriculture, the Honorable Mike Naig, Director Kelly Garcia, Representative Brian Losey, and Senator Annette Sweeney. Ambassador Quinn, thank you for being here because you've been part of making the Iowa Hunger Summit what it is today. You were kind of the inspiration for this. And Paul Schickler is here, Chairman of the World Food Prize Foundation Board. And thank you, Paul, for joining us today. As we gather today, it's worth noting the significance of September 11th and 12th, as they mark the anniversaries of the passing of both John Ruan III and Dr. Norman Borlaug. Rachel Ruan McLean is here with us today. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us. Rachel is carrying on her father and Dr. Borlaug's great legacies. Furthermore, September 26th would have marked the 95th birthday of my esteemed co-founder of the Iowa Hunger Summit, Governor Robert D. Ray. It fills me with deep satisfaction to witness his legacy manifest in our Distinguished Iowa Shares Award, which will be presented and given to Simon Estes today. This is my first Iowa Hunger Summit as president of the World Food Prize, and I'm very proud to be in this position. I couldn't think of a better setting for this event than this beautiful, restored building, the Hall of Laureates, a place that honors the legacy of Dr. Norman Borlaug and the Ruan family and focuses on driving innovation forward. We need that Borlaug can-do spirit of innovation to guide us, and we need the grit and determination that he and the Ruan family have always shown to reach out and do all we can to reach our hunger and health objectives. So now, please welcome to the stage our first dialogue participants, Programs to Pathways. How do we nourish every Iowan? Featuring Director Kelly Garcia and the Honorable Mike Naig, Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, and it will be moderated by State Senator Annette Sweeney.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out today. And what a beautiful day. The weather is now starting to feel fallish, and you can even hear the way the leaves sound when the wind blows through that fall is upon us. So this morning, I was so thankful that Ambassador Branstad asked me to be the moderator for today. And Ambassador Quinn, you and I go a long way back. And in fact, he was the one that inspired me to go to the first Hall of Laureates. And so we've experienced some really positive things throughout the years. Today, oh, you're quite welcome. Except one time we got stuck in Oklahoma in a snowstorm, but that's a story for another day. This morning, we get to hear from two individuals that I have worked with throughout the years in the Iowa Senate and also the Iowa House when I've been there, and Kelly Garcia. She is praised for transformative leadership, and as the director of the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, Governor Kim Reynolds appointed Garcia to oversee the state's social services agency in November of 2019. She was unanimously confirmed by the Iowa Senate on February 26, 2020. Later that year, Garcia was asked to serve as an interim public health director. Before moving to the Hawkeye State, Garcia led improvements in organizational structure, program management, and policy development in the great state of Texas, including serving in several executive positions in the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. Garcia has more than 20 years of experience in program evaluation, budget, planning, and policy development. Secretary Naig, on my left, he and I have also worked many years together, and we both believe that everybody eats. And that's why agriculture is so key to be able to, really address this hunger summit. Mike Naig grew up on a family farm in the northwest corner of the state near Cylinder, Iowa. He continues to be involved in the operation today. Mike is a graduate of Buena Vista University in Storm Lake with degrees in biology and political science. He and his wife, Jamie, have 3 boys. Mike was elected as the 15th Iowa Secretary of Agriculture in November of 2018 and was reelected in 2022. As secretary, he is committed to lead the efforts to expand economic opportunities for Iowans and is an advocate on behalf of the hardworking men and women who keep us fed and fueled. Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you so much, Secretary Naig, for joining us today. So the first question that we have, and I will let Mike take it first. As you lead major state agencies that are on the front lines of food production, hunger alleviation, and healthcare, what motivates you, and both of you, as leaders, and what experiences have shaped that motivation?
Well, thank you. Thanks, Senator. It's going to be strange for us to refer to each other with titles. We'll just
I know,
say
this is pretty tough, yeah.
We go too far back. I think I even said, introduce me any way you want to, and then I regretted instantly saying that. Happy to be here. This is such a wonderful event. What an important gathering of folks. And I think it's an important piece of leading into the Borlaug Dialogue coming up here in 47 days, Marshall tells me. Not that we're counting, right? But we will talk about those famous Borlaug hunger fighters from around the world, across the United States, around the world. But doesn't it make sense that we could start that conversation in the most local way? It's important what happens right here, and it's important. So what I'll talk a little bit about today might connect those dots between certainly agriculture is a global affair. We're affected by things that happen all over the world. And those things happen and impact us very, very locally, and locally we impact globally. So we need to keep that in mind in the course of this conversation. So I think it's fitting that we have this type of discussion, especially as we're leading into what will come in just over a month. You know, what inspires me or what motivates me? I have to say that, really, I have a job to do. We both do. Director, good to be up here with you. And I take that very seriously, so I'll do my job. I'll do my part to be a part of the solution here in the state of Iowa. But on a personal level, I have to tell you that there's a couple things that stick in my mind as it relates to nutrition and hunger. 2 of those occurred at a World Food Prize dialogue, watching a panel. One was on farmers from smallholder farmers from Africa, female farmers. One talked about her experience when she first had access to GM seeds. And she was able to grow enough of the crop to not only supply their family, but she could sell it for the first time she had the ability to pay for a child's education. Transformative, changed the child's life because of access to technology, because of agriculture, because of the ability to be productive. That stuck with me. And 2, there was a panel really focused on, that was a year that was focused on nutrition, and especially nutrition for our youngest kids, those first couple of years. And the fact that because of lack of access to calories or because of malnutrition, that you've got cognitive and physical development issues that are things you don't fix later in life if you miss that opportunity. And I went home and looked at my own children that night and I said, those boys will never have that challenge put in front of them. They'll have others, but they'll never have that one just because of where they live. But take that a little further. I traveled across this state extensively, especially in the last couple of years, visiting food banks and food pantries. And, if you're not looking for it, you might think that hunger doesn't exist in the state of Iowa. Well, it does. It's somewhat more hidden here than it is in other places, but it's there, and it's been there in a major way in the last couple of years. And then I apply those lessons, those things that I think about globally, and they're happening right in our own communities. And so those are the things that motivate me in this conversation and what we can do to be a part of it.
Perfect.
Well, what a great way to cue off of the Secretary's comments. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. My own journey to kind of understanding health really comes from my own personal experience. I think every leader has that, right? The pathway of how you come to what you call your career. I struggled with a lot of medical issues as a child, an adolescent, and an early adult, and really embraced both activity and nutrition as a really key component. And that led me to a journey of really completely changing my life. It led me to the ability to have my children. And so I am deeply rooted in eating seasonally. I'm a regular participant and have grown to love 2 farmers locally and visit them every week as part of a CSA membership and a meat share. And believe it or not, when my husband and I were making that list of whether or not to pack up our family and move my multi-generational Texan husband up 900 miles away from everything he knew, and our 2 children, who were very, very little at the time, access to food was high on the list. The farmer's market, the seasonal nature, not having, we're coastal people, so not having access to this rich, deep roots of agriculture was key. The other piece, of course, was the phenomenal history in this state. The deep partnerships, the community experience. It is such a gift. I was visiting with the governor yesterday and told her, I'm not sure if you're not a born native Iowan that you really fully understand exactly how different it is. It is so amazing. And to lead this agency and to think about the roots of what health and human services mean in our state. We're serving all Iowans. We do that through our public health functions. But we're also serving families in crisis and need. And everyone has that journey. Everyone eats, but as the Secretary said, if you come to us in a crisis moment, if you're not having those baseline supports of food, we can't expect you to be thriving in any way. There is an absolutely interconnectedness in mental health to physical health. And so that's really what drives me today. And now I have the opportunity to do that in a consolidated health and human services structure.
Perfect. All right, Director Garcia, we'll just lob this to you now. Tell us about the projects, initiatives, and/or policies that each of you and of your departments are leading that alleviate hunger and diet-related diseases within and beyond Iowa.
So such a fantastic question, and there's no shortage of opportunity or direction and unique opportunities that we have in the agency today, especially because we have all of the supports in one agency now, which really allows us to both do really deep and meaningful community needs assessments around what the health outcome drivers are. Some of our metrics are going in the wrong direction in this state. It's going in the wrong direction in cancer and diabetes and in childhood obesity. And so we have a really significant opportunity here now to use some pretty significant drivers on the insurance side, because we also operate the Medicaid program, as well as through our really substantial programs supporting aging individuals. I see some team members here, Alex is over at this table, who really support our aging population. And then, as the Secretary mentioned, phenomenal opportunities around early childhood intervention, development, and that is absolutely the space that we focus on in our agency. So across all of our services, we're home to the SNAP program, we're home to the WIC program. Those are 2 really significant payment structures. WIC has a core competency around nutrition, but at the federal level, I'm really trying to have a dialogue with Secretary Vilsack and his team around the importance and the need to have really core components of nutrition based into that kind of what is a cash payment for food structure. And that's a challenging one, but it's one we should have, and we should make make that commitment to our children. Childhood obesity is not a child problem, it's an adult problem, and I feel like we can solve this. And what better state to do it than Iowa?
Very good, Secretary Naig.
You know, I'll take a couple of lenses at this. One is we do have an opportunity through USDA programs. You're going to hear about the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. That's a mouthful, an acronym, alphabet soup of federal programs, but important ways to leverage dollars, bring resources to the state of Iowa. I think there's a breakout session later on that, but that's about sourcing food locally, making it available through food hubs and food pantries. So we're happy to be a partner in that effort. We're really doing a lot of work around the local foods movement, food system resiliency and processing more locally, making healthy, nutritious foods available locally, connecting the dots between the farm and school. Mm-hmm. I can think of another story that experience that sticks out in my mind visiting a school. Talking with the principal, and they had just brought breakfast into the classroom. Oh boy, was that going to be a mess. It was going to be a problem, right? Turns out discipline issues were down, learning outcomes were up because food was available every morning in the classroom. Oh, and by the way, it was a community building type exercise too, because who doesn't love sharing a meal together? And that's true of our youngest citizens as well as you and I in this room. And so those are things that stick in my head and are also things that we're directly involved in. But I'm going to take another pass here too on I think my role on the production side of this conversation would be to say something along the lines of we also need to remain productive in our agriculture space, both here and around the world, to ensure that we do have the availability of food, that we do have the availability of nutritious, safe, affordable. Those things matter in this conversation. Inflation is real. Food inflation is real. Ask anybody feeding a family, ask anybody that might be sourcing food for a food pantry, food bank, et cetera, what the cost of food has done in the last couple of years, 20% at least. Up. We're used to maybe a 1 or 2% increase in food prices. Those things are real. Those impact food security issues. And so I think we do have to keep our eye on that macro issue here as well, which is the economy matters, global trade matters, things that we can't control like weather and a Russian invasion of Ukraine matter in terms of food availability and food security around the world. And those things impact us here. So I've been thinking a lot this year about kind of the back to basics on how does food get to our plate, and what does it take, where does it start, and who are the essential people in that supply chain. We can't forget that in this whole conversation. And I guess the other would just be that one more pass at the idea that the things that happen here impact others, and the things that happen around the world impact here, and we've got to keep those things in mind. We're watching food insecurity develop and maybe even around farm policy around the world, and we say things like, gosh, that could never happen here, right? No, it could, and we need to keep those things in mind, especially as we are talking about a farm bill. Those things matter in the macro sense in this whole conversation as well. So those are kind of the big picture and maybe the local level, the way I would think about that issue.
Okay, perfect, thank you very much. Tell us about a successful hunger food initiative, why it worked, and what your or you organization learned from it.
So I think back a couple years ago that we worked together with Lieutenant Governor Gregg on the governor's Feeding Iowans task force during COVID. We had a massive supply chain disruption, especially in the protein space, processing facilities shutting down, and that created a challenge that, in terms of just moving animals through that system. And so there became an opportunity then, and there was a great need at food banks and food pantries. And so I say two bad things converged to create something that I think ended up being very positive. I wasn't a bit surprised. The agriculture community in this state steps up, and they're generous contributors to charities, food banks, food pantries, local community efforts, and so it wasn't a surprise at all that whether it was the egg industry or pork, beef, turkey, that folks stepped up. We also had a great partnership that developed with Iowa State University. President Winterstein is here. I remember having a little conversation about, we need to get some beef processed, and suddenly the meat lab was kicked into gear, which I think was an important experience for those students, by the way, to be doing something that was, yes, educational, but it had a purpose like nobody could have ever thought of before. And so that provided 1.7 million servings of, actually more servings, that was pounds of protein through food banks, which we knew were in great demand for fresh for protein in food pantries and food banks. The other thing that we did was, in the course of that, realized that there was a learning there that there wasn't enough refrigeration and freezer space to handle that. I will always remember the thank you note that came in to one of those from one of those pantries, and they had a freezer that was installed when Ronald Reagan was president, and they were happy to replace it. And I laughed, and I thought, well, there's probably some efficiency gains there from that one. But in all seriousness, and I love to do this when I'm in pantries now, is I'm kind of rude. I walk straight over to the freezer and I open it up and look in and say, what's in here for me? But I think that was an incredibly successful one. What we learned is that there are tremendous capacity challenges all across the board when it comes to our food pantries.
So I think, as the Secretary mentioned, a solid disaster gives you an opportunity to dive really deep and learn about exactly where those gaps are. It shines a bright light into them. And so we've certainly had some opportunities to do that. That summer of 2020, I likened myself coming from a coastal space to have a solid foundation in disasters, and then a straight line windstorm hit the state. And so that was really challenging. It was challenging for a variety of reasons. The swath of the storm, the sheer devastation on the eastern side of our state, and COVID challenged us. We learned a lot during that time. We deployed as an agency what's called disaster SNAP benefits. That's food replacement benefits in a disaster. And we did that. We were the first state to do it in the middle of the global pandemic in a way that allowed us to start reaching different communities and pockets on the eastern side of the state, especially around our refugee communities. And so we did a lot of really deep learning and community building, capacity building during that disaster response. So what a phenomenal opportunity, I think, to really have a kind of jump start space into the deeper work that we're now doing in terms of capacity building in refugee spaces. Amazing, really amazing. So just from disaster to opportunity. I think at the same time, we've had no shortage of kind of continued challenges. I want to talk a little bit about the formula shortage, and that partnership also born out of a lot of deep relationships that we formed during the pandemic response. But when that became a national issue, and every state was really rallying both through the WIC program, through the Medicaid program, but just generally for Iowa's women, irrespective of how you're receiving your formula benefit, if you are just a consumer, how are you navigating that? Feeding your baby, very important. And we really were able to call on some really significant partners in the state, both Hy-Vee and Fairway, to help us navigate that. And that was a natural call and a natural partnership, an extension of us through what we learned during our pandemic response experience. And I think that continues today. It continues now in working on clear health outcomes and partnerships there to make sure that every Iowan, especially those who are using our benefits, who are users of our benefits for daily nutrition support, to have access and an understanding of how to prepare foods. And that's incredibly important. So now I think, through some of that work, we have deeper relationships through our community action agencies, which just transferred to us on July 1, to really build out those community networks, as the Secretary mentioned, in a deeper, more meaningful and sustainable way, making sure we're reaching far outside of those urban areas into the rural parts of Iowa. And that is a really phenomenal opportunity. We have so many rich resources in the state. What I see is in some spaces it's fragmented, right? It still remains a bit siloed. And so really what we'll be focused on over the next year, we're excited to have a conversation with the legislature this next session, is a system assessment of our work. So the extension of us, of which we have some really phenomenal partners that are out there on the front lines. But I think, again, we see some opportunity to better connect those resources.
Fabulous. We, last year, the local foods, and we passed that bill and funding for that. And I'm looking forward to those conversations, because it was one to really outline how what you were just talking about, reaching our rural areas as well as our suburban areas. And we also need to keep in mind that hunger is just not some other country. We do have this in the state of Iowa. Our next question: Where are there overlapping hunger initiatives between the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services and the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship? And where are there more opportunities for collaboration down the road?
Well, I think we already have, a deep partnership between our agencies. There's always room to grow. And I think especially now, again, that we have visibility into both what's driving some of the spaces where we have room for improvement in the state. I really do see that early childhood and school space. School nutrition is with our partners in the Department of Ed, but we are working with our Department of Education partners around a summer feeding program, which is an exciting new opportunity that Congress passed very recently. And we're really thinking about this through a holistic lens of nutrition and also through an intergenerational lens, because we are also now the home to aging services in the state. We're thinking about those congregate meal sites and intergenerational caregiving and some really phenomenal and exciting opportunities to both support local farmers and bring really nutritious, dense foods to a setting that allows us to serve a family, right? And I think that's not the way we've thought about it from a state agency perspective before, and so we're really excited to have those conversations. The other space is really around how we support local farmers in our refugee population, as I kind of just mentioned, right? I've had the opportunity over the summer to see a really phenomenal space, really supported by the University of Northern Iowa, and UNI has some lovely community gardens that are supported on the side of a campus for a federally qualified health clinic, right? An FQHC that's serving individuals, and they have easy access to free box vegetables, supported by volunteer capacity, which is also now home at Iowa HHS. And so we're, I think, really just gonna be able to kind of propagate that network of services. We're talking with UNI about how to do that in central Iowa. And those opportunities exist in talking with with Secretary Naig and our partners in agriculture on how to exactly make that sustainable across the state.
Amen. You know, it's more of what we're doing today, more of it, right? And I think that connecting those dots on the refugee side of things, I have to say that, you know, I'm a big believer in the restorative nature of getting your hands dirty.
I love it.
Getting in the soil. I think there's something to that. And many of our refugee communities come from agriculture backgrounds. And so how can we, it's never been easy to start farming in Iowa, ever. It's certainly not easy when you're coming from somewhere around the world to plug in and get established here. But there are so many opportunities, and I think it's so important for families to get established and to be able to have that connection to our land, to their land. And I think that's so important. So there's tremendous opportunities there. You know, we want to continue to build out this. Hey, we need to make sure it's available, right? We need to make sure there's farmers that are available, that the supply chains exist to supply what we need locally, that kids get a chance. By the way, one of the things we didn't talk about yet is that connecting the farm to the school is that you do have to learn things about seasonality. And you can establish some healthy eating habits because of that conversation. I'm all about the kids knowing more about where their food comes from if you can't tell. And so I think if we can connect the dots between farmers and farms locally with kids in school, it's a nutritious food that they need. By the way, those heroes, those school nutrition directors who are out there, they're heroes. They really are. Every time I'm visiting a school, I get panicky when I'm in the kitchen. You know, they have to put hundreds, maybe thousands of meals on the tray every lunch day. It's got to be safe. It's got to be perfect. It's got to meet the expectations of that kindergartner. I've served kindergartners lunch. It's rough. You better be on your game. I filled the milk container, you know, a little hole there, square in the tray. You all know what I'm talking about, the one with the circle in it. Yeah. Don't you dare do that. You will find out very quickly that you have done something wrong. But isn't that great? We're feeding those little kids and giving them an opportunity to know something about what a nutritious meal looks like. I think those are tremendous opportunities. And by the way, they also there's motivations on the business side and the market development side as we launch Choose Iowa, Iowa brand for Iowa grown, Iowa made, Iowa raised products. Let's build this out. There's so much opportunity here.
This is so exciting, being able to connect individuals, whether it's in the garden or in the
Yeah.
supply chain. As a farmer, I really appreciate your comments. And our last question, what future opportunities are there for enhancing nutritious food security that gets you really excited? I have to watch it. I'm ready just to jump right in on that one. But go ahead.
So a couple things. One is maybe I'll stick with the theory of not so much that I'm excited about it, but that there's a great need and it's a motivator. But I'm also excited about what that can develop, and we do have food deserts, and I think particularly about our rural areas and access to fresh produce, to dairy, to meat, and to be able to do that. You know, the country store is gone. The small town grocery store, many have closed. Yet we have seen some recent actions from some of our grocers in the state of Iowa and local efforts to rally around the cause of putting stores back into some of our smaller communities. I think that's important. I think we ought to look at that in a serious way from a policy standpoint at the state of Iowa. It's a workforce imperative in addition to being the right thing to do from a healthy outcomes standpoint is we ought to make sure that you can live, work, and play in any community of any size across the state of Iowa. And nutrition's got to be a component of that. The reason we can be excited is because, and Governor Branstad talked about this too, it's all about the innovation that we see brought to this issue, the creativity. I'm sitting here looking at the Borlaug boyhood home painting here in the back, and I like to tell people all the time, especially when I'm speaking to young people, that, and I can say this because I am one too, Norman Borlaug was just a farm kid who grew up on a gravel road. Just a farm kid who grew up on a gravel road in Howard County. You should visit the farm if you've never been there. And that man went on to save over 1 billion lives because of the work that he did. My goodness, he had every barrier and obstacle in front of him, and there he was. So what makes any of us think that we can't have even a huge impact, let alone a small impact locally, regardless of what your personal background is? And so I think we need to continue to carry that charge forward, that these are not insurmountable issues. They're hard, they're complex, there's not one thing. You didn't hear Director Garcia or I say there's one thing that we have to do coming out of today to solve this problem. It doesn't exist. There's 17 one things that have to happen simultaneously. And it's putting your shoulder to those efforts in a sustained, dedicated way with real resources and leveraging each other's experiences and capacities. That's how you see the measurable change that you want to see. So, because we've done those things in the past in Iowa, that's why I can be excited about where we can go on this issue.
Couldn't agree more, Secretary Naig. I see our role as an agency and a key driver in that conversation. And again, kind of queuing back to what we're working on over the interim to queue up for a session conversation around our agency, our alignment, and our system alignment is really thinking about how do we drive on those clear health outcomes? How do we have financial components that make that accessibility easy for people, right? Because that's key. We can have access, but the understanding and the knowledge to give individuals the agency to make that choice is really something that we hold dear in our agency and across our programmatic lines. You know, what we're thinking about there is how do we direct funding to local communities so that they can solve those big issues? How do we create really clear metrics so that we can understand as a state how we're making progress on those issues and be able to see it over time? That's the conversation we're ready to have, and we're incredibly excited about it as a new HHS agency in this state, really thinking about it, I think, comprehensively for the first time in our state's history from this HHS perspective. Again, there's there's not one thing that will solve this issue, but I really do believe that it starts to build a very, very clear pathway. And if we lean on our partners, government cannot solve these problems and shouldn't solve them alone. So really making sure that we're creating that space to invite our community partners, our nonprofits, our faith-based communities, and our farmers to the table to help us solve that together. I really think we have a plan sitting right in front of us.
Perfect. Closing comments.
Mr. Secretary.
Jump ball, I
Okay.
guess. You go first.
Okay. Again, I just am really kind of humbled and honored to be here today. What I reflected on when the ambassador sent the invitation is just how delighted these 2 Texans, now 4 Texans, are to call Iowa home. When the secretary was talking about teaching your children about seasonal eating, I mean, that is what the Garcia family is doing in our household on a daily basis. It delights me to live in this state, to be part of such a rich fabric of communities, and to lead this agency now in a new form with the governor's direction. It's just been an absolutely phenomenal opportunity. I see so many friends and colleagues in this space. I'm excited and energized about the work that we're doing and the pathways that we're building.
Let me just add, and Director, I think, reform can be challenging, right? Change can be difficult, and I think that's something we all need to keep in mind here as we launch into the next couple of years, especially as your agency continues to take shape, that there are some things that are going to have to change, and what does that look like, and that we're open to those things. I really think we've got to be smart about how we do this. I couldn't agree more, by the way, on the idea that you don't want government to be the only entity driving these things. We can be the source of significant funding and resources, but it's about leverage. It's about deploying people all across this state and leveraging each other's experiences and expertise and resources. That's how you get things done. That's how you solve problems. That's what I see every day across the state of Iowa, is that innovation, creativity, and people putting their shoulder to things. Right. And you wonder why. Why are you doing it? You know what happens? You start to look around the room one day and you say, somebody oughta. Somebody oughta. Fill in the blank. Well, guess what? You're the somebody. And you'd better be thinking about the somebody that comes after you as well, by the way. That's also a piece of capacity as we got to keep building out. It's the people, and that's what will solve this issue. That's what we need to keep in front of us. And again, I just, thanks for the opportunity to help kick things off. I think we've laid enough runway for the rest of the day, maybe, for people to dig into. Yeah. But thanks for being here. Thanks for hosting this great, very worthy and appropriate conversation as we're heading into fall.
Well, I'd like to thank Director Garcia and Secretary Naig for kicking this off, because I do believe that everyone in this room believes in agriculture, believes in health and human services, and how those can work and network together. Because our farmers provide the food, fiber, fuel, and pharmaceuticals for everyone. And we have our end users, and we need to make sure that we have the oughta in the back of our mind and how we can make sure that we can bridge those gaps. Thanks very much to everyone that was here, and thank everyone for attending.